The kitchen smelled of wood smoke and cold grease when Thomas Aldrin came in from the eastern pasture at 4:15 in the afternoon. He had been mending the split-rail fence along the creek bed since first light. His hands were raw. His boots were still wet from where he'd crossed the shallow ford twice, carrying posts on his shoulder like a man who believed that broken things, if you worked at them long enough, would hold again. He set his hat on the hook by the door. He poured himself water from the tin pitcher on the sideboard. He turned around. The table was clean. That was the first thing that struck him. Not the absence of her, not the cold stove, not the silence that sat inside the house like something breathing. It was the table being clean that stopped him. Clara never cleaned the table before supper. She cleaned it after. That was her way. 21 months of marriage in that small domestic order had become as fixed as the position of the mountains. The table was clean, and in the center of it there was a piece of brown paper. Not a sheet torn from something larger, a piece she had saved. He recognized it. It had wrapped the salt pork they'd bought in Lincoln 3 weeks ago. She had kept it folded behind the sugar tin, the way she kept everything that might still be useful. Brown paper, rough along one edge, soft where it had been held. On it, in charcoal, she had used the drawing charcoal she kept in the blue tin on the windowsill, the one she used when she sketched the ridgeline in the evenings. 3 words, just 3 words. I had to. He read them 4 times. The first time he did not understand. The second time, he understood too much. The third time, he looked around the room, as though the house itself might offer correction, might lean in and say, "No, wait, you're reading that wrong. She meant something else. She meant she had to go to the Parkers' place. She had to see about the calf they'd asked her to look at. She had to—" The fourth time, he sat down. He sat in his chair, the one that faced the window, the one with the slight lean to the left because one leg was shorter than the others, and he'd never gotten around to shimming it. And he held the brown paper in both hands, and he read those 3 words until the light through the window went from gold to orange to the particular shade of gray that meant the sun had gone below the Capitan Mountains and taken everything warm with it. I had to. The stove was cold. She had not cooked that day. He checked the bedroom. Her good dress was gone. The green one with the small white buttons at the wrist that she only wore into Lincoln. Her winter coat, the heavy brown wool one, was also gone. Her mother's Bible, the one she kept on the windowsill beside the charcoal tin, was gone. The charcoal tin was still there. She had used one piece and put the rest back. That detail would stay with him for years, the putting back of the rest. He walked to the barn. The roan mare was still there. The buckboard was still there. She had not taken a horse. She had not taken the wagon. He stood in the barn door and worked it through until he arrived at the only answer, the Thursday morning stagecoach. The one that came through Hondo Crossing at 6:30 in the morning and went north to Santa Fe. She would have walked the 4 miles to the road in the dark, her good dress on, her mother's Bible under her arm, whatever else she could carry without a horse. She had planned this. She had waited for a Thursday. He went back inside and sat down again. I had to. Part 2. What she meant. Her name was Clara Eugenia Marsh before she was Clara Aldrin, and she had come to New Mexico Territory from Missouri in the spring of 1879 with her father and her father's debts, and the particular kind of optimism that forms in people when they have nothing left to protect. She had met Thomas Aldrin at a land auction in Lincoln. He was tall and quiet and owned 93 acres outright, which in 1879, in Lincoln County, in the year following the war that had torn the territory apart, was a kind of miracle. He had looked at her with serious eyes and asked if she would like to see the place before she made up her mind. She had thought that was a proposal. Later, she would understand it had been, just not the kind you could refuse gracefully. They were married 6 months later. Her father signed something she wasn't shown. The land was beautiful. That was never the question. The Capitan Range in the morning light, the creek that ran clean and cold even in August. The way the sky over New Mexico was a different color than Missouri's sky. Deeper, more committed to being blue. She had sketched it all. She had kept her charcoal tin on the windowsill and drawn the ridge line in the evenings and told herself that this was a life. This was a life she had chosen. This counted as choosing. But there are things that happen inside a marriage that have no name in polite language, and there are things a woman in 1881 in the New Mexico Territory cannot say to anyone, not the preacher, not the neighbors, not her father who has already signed something she wasn't shown. There are doors that close and do not open from the inside. There are silences that are not peaceful. There are hands that do not break fences but break other things, quieter things, things that don't leave marks that a doctor would write down. She had stayed for 21 months. She had stayed because there was nowhere to go. because her father's optimism had not survived New Mexico, and he was back in Missouri now, living in a room above a hardware store, unable to receive her. Because a woman alone in 1881 was a problem that no institution had a clean solution for. Because the law, such as it was in Lincoln County, still raw from Billy the Kid and the Murphy faction, and 3 years of men settling things with rifles, did not concern itself with the interior architecture of a marriage. She had stayed, and she had stayed, and she had stayed. And then one morning in early October, the Thursday stagecoach had become a fact she could not stop thinking about. She had thought about the note for weeks before she wrote it. She had considered, "I'm sorry," but she wasn't. Or she was, but not for leaving. She was sorry for things she couldn't explain in the space of a kept salt pork wrapper. And sorry felt like a door left open, like an invitation for someone to follow and argue her back. She had considered, "I cannot stay," closer, but cannot felt like weakness, like she was asking him to understand her as a limited creature rather than a woman who had made a decision with full knowledge of what it cost. She had considered, "I am leaving," but that was just description. That told him nothing about the weight of it, the years of calculation, the way she had lain awake counting the Thursday mornings she had let pass. She had picked up the charcoal on the morning of October 9th, 1881, with the gray pre-dawn still dark in the window, and she had written what was true. I had to. Not I wanted to, not I chose to, not "you made me," though that was buried inside it, compressed into those 3 words like everything that cannot be said in the space a woman is given to say things. I had to meant. This was not impulsive. This was not feeling. This was conclusion. This was the end of a very long calculation that I carried alone because there was no one to carry it with me. I had to meant. I am not asking your forgiveness because I do not believe I require it, but I am also not asking you to hate me. I am asking you to understand, if you are capable of it, that some doors only open from the outside. I had to meant. I am a woman who sketched the mountains in the evening because it was the only hour that belonged to me, and I used the last piece of daylight in this house to draw my own way out. She walked 4 miles to the Hondo crossing in the dark with her mother's Bible and her green dress and a small amount of money she had kept, a few coins at a time, over many months, from the household funds, sewn into the hem of her winter coat. She did not look back at the house. She had looked at it enough. When the stagecoach came, she climbed aboard and sat on the left side so she could watch the Capitan Range as it moved past the window. She sketched it once more in her mind, without the charcoal, without the tin. A different kind of keeping. She had to. Part 3. What he heard. Thomas Aldrin heard, "You were not enough." He heard, "I chose absence over you." He heard, "Whatever we built here was not worth staying for." He was not a man given to self-examination. That is not a cruelty. It is simply the shape of the man he had been made into by the particular forces that make men in that time and place. Hard land, taciturn father, the Lincoln County War that had eaten 4 of his friends and left the survivors with the habit of not naming things directly. You fixed fences. You planted. You endured. You did not discuss the quality of your silences or the temperature of your hands. He told no one for 3 days. He did the chores. He fed the mare. He ate cold things from the larder without heating them. He read the 3 words so many times that the charcoal began to blur, and he was careful then, suddenly careful, handling the brown paper with the tenderness he had not known how to offer when it would have mattered. On the 4th day, he rode into Lincoln and told the postmaster that his wife had gone east to tend to a sick relation. This was the story he would tell for the rest of his life in that county. He believed she had left because of another man, not because there was any evidence of this, there was none, but because it was the explanation that made the most sense to the part of him that needed sense. It rearranged the wound from something he might have caused to something that had simply happened to him, like weather, like the cattle sickness that had come through in '79. Things that happen to a man, not things a man does. He kept the note. He kept it in his shirt pocket until the brown paper grew soft as cloth at the folds, and then he put it in the small tin box where he kept the deed to the land and his father's watch. Every few months he would open the tin and look at it, 3 words in charcoal, fading. He never wrote to find her. He would tell himself this was because he didn't know where to write. This was partially true. He never remarried. He would tell himself this was because there was no suitable woman in the county. This was less true. He mended fences. He planted. He endured. He grew old in the way that men who are left grow old, slightly sideways, leaning into the absence like a tree that has grown around a wound in its own wood. He died in 1903, 22 years after the October morning with the cold stove and the clean table. The tin box went to his brother in Roswell. Part 4. The One Who Explained. Her name was Patience Delgado, and she was the postmaster's wife in Lincoln from 1887 until 1914, which meant she knew everyone's business without anyone ever quite realizing she knew, which is the particular skill of women in that position in small towns. She had been 18 years old in October of 1881, working for the Burroughs family as a house girl, and she had been at the Hondo Crossing that Thursday morning, not to take the stagecoach, but because old Mr. Burroughs sent her every Thursday to collect his correspondence from the driver. She had seen Clara Aldrin climb aboard. She had seen Clara Aldrin's face. She had not seen the face of a woman running toward something. Not toward excitement, not toward love, not toward a man. She had seen the face of a woman who had been walking toward that stagecoach for a very long time in her mind, and had simply, finally, arrived. Patience Delgado told no one for years. It was not her story. And in Lincoln County, in 1881, a woman climbing a stagecoach was not news worth the trouble it would cause. But in 1903, when Thomas Aldrin died and his brother came to settle the affairs, Patience Delgado was 62 years old and had decided that certain things deserved to be said before the people who could receive them were also gone. She went to see the brother, a man named Robert Aldrin, softer than Thomas, with kind eyes and the look of someone who had always been slightly bewildered by his older brother. She sat in the kitchen of what had been Thomas's house, the same kitchen, the same table, though the table had been replaced twice by then, and she told him what she had seen at the Hondo Crossing in October of 1881, not what Clara had felt. Patience did not presume to know what Clara had felt, but what she had seen on Clara's face, which was not betrayal and was not romance, and was not even escape exactly. It was completion, she told Robert Aldrin, like a woman who had finally finished a very long and difficult task. Robert Aldrin was quiet for a long time. Then he said, he thought there was someone else. Patience Delgado said, I know. Robert Aldrin said, was there? Patience Delgado looked at him, this soft, kind man who had grown up beside his harder brother, and she said, very carefully, there was somewhere else. That's different. He turned this over. She let him. He said, he kept her note until he died. She said, I know that too. He said, 3 words. He never understood what she meant. She said, he understood one meaning. There were others. She did not explain further. She did not have the language for it, not because she lacked intelligence, but because the language for what happened inside certain marriages, the language for what a woman in 1881 in the New Mexico Territory might endure in silence for 21 months, that language had not yet been made public. It existed, in whispers, between women. It did not yet exist in the spaces where men could hear it and know what they were hearing. She said, she had to. That's what the note said, and that's what was true. Robert Aldrin looked at the table. Patience Delgado thought, this is the closest it will come to being understood. This man, in this kitchen, in 1903, 22 years after the fact. This is the nearest the gap between what she meant and what he heard will ever get to closing. She stood up. She thanked him for the coffee. At the door, she turned around. She said, your brother was not a bad man. I want you to know that I know that. Robert Aldrin said, but Patience Delgado put on her coat. But not a bad man is not always the same as a good enough reason to stay. She walked home through the October afternoon, the same month, the same mountains, 22 years later. The Capitan Range in the distance, the particular blue of the New Mexico sky. Somewhere, she did not know where, had never tried to find out, Clara Aldrin was 60-something years old and living a life that had been, at minimum, her own choosing. Patience believed this. She held it with the same firmness with which she held other things she could not prove. Part 5. The Gap. This is the thing about 3 words. They are not a vessel. They do not hold a fixed amount. 3 words are a door left open, and what walks through depends entirely on who is standing on which side. I had to, spoken by a woman in a green dress with coins sewn into her hem, written in the gray hour before a Thursday morning stagecoach, by the light of a charcoal stub held in a hand that had long since made its peace with what it was doing. I had to, received by a man who came in from the fence line with wet boots and raw hands, and the particular exhaustion of a man who has been trying to hold things together all day, and finds, when he arrives home, that something essential has already come apart. The same 3 words, the same brown paper, the same charcoal fading. She meant necessity, the kind that builds quietly over months and years, that does not announce itself, that arrives one morning not as a feeling but as a fact. I cannot be here anymore. Not, I will not. I cannot. The way you cannot hold your breath past a certain point. Not weakness, not choice, just the body finally overruling the will that has been insisting it can manage. He heard insufficiency, his, the place, the life, the man he was, insufficient, not worth the staying. Whatever he had built and offered and tried to make adequate had failed some measurement he was never shown. Both of these were true. That is the particular cruelty of 3 words. They are not wrong, they are just incomplete. And incompleteness, in human understanding, always fills itself with whatever the reader already carries. Their fear, their guilt, their grief, their defenses, their very particular and private architecture of shame. She carried 21 months of a marriage that had asked her to be smaller than she was. Not smaller in size, smaller in will, smaller in wanting. She had been asked, without anyone using those words, to want only what was offered and to find it enough. She had tried. For 21 months, she had tried in the way that women in 1881 tried. Practically, quietly, without complaint to anyone who could help, because there was no one who could help. She had cooked and cleaned and tended and sketched the ridgeline in the evenings, and she had stayed. And then one morning, the Thursday stagecoach had been more real to her than anything else in the kitchen. And she had understood that staying any longer would require her to become someone she was not willing to become. So she had written what was true, and she had walked 4 miles in the dark, and she had left. He carried 22 years of a note he could not read correctly. Not because he was stupid. He was not stupid. Because he was reading it with the grammar of his own wound, and his wound had a very specific vocabulary. Abandonment, failure, replacement. He could not read necessity in those words, because his own language did not have a place for a wife's necessity. It had a place for a wife's duty, her presence, her continuation. It did not have a grammar for her interior logic, her slow calculation, her private arithmetic of survival. He had loved her. This is important to say. He had loved her in the way he knew how to love. Steadily, with fences mended and land maintained and presents offered, day after day, in the form of a man who came home from the pasture every evening and ate at the same table. This is not nothing. This is a form of love. It was not the form she needed. These 2 things exist simultaneously, and neither cancels the other out. Coda. What the mountains kept. The Capitan Range is still there. The creek still runs clean and cold in August. The sky over New Mexico is still that particular shade of blue, deeper than Missouri blue, more committed, as though it has decided to mean something. The house was sold in 1903, after Thomas died. It changed hands 4 times in the following decades. The kitchen table that replaced the kitchen table, that replaced the original kitchen table, is gone now, dispersed into the general entropy of things that were once held and then were not. The brown paper note, 3 words in charcoal, I had to, soft at the folds from 22 years of a man reading it in the wrong language, went to Robert Aldrin, who was not certain what to do with it, and who eventually kept it in his own small box along with his own small relics, and who told his daughter about it once. The story of his brother and the woman who left a note, and his daughter told her daughter, and it became one of those family stories that exist in the seam between gossip and legend, losing detail with each telling, keeping only its emotional shape. A woman left, a man stayed. 3 words. Something was never understood. Clara Aldrin. Clara Marsh, as she went back to being. There was nothing stopping her from that, at least. Lived until 1917 in Santa Fe, where she eventually found work as a seamstress, and later as a woman who taught other women to read, which was a thing that was beginning to be possible in New Mexico by the 1890s. Slowly, imperfectly, but possible. She kept the charcoal tin on her windowsill there, too. She sketched the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in the evenings. Different mountains, same gesture. She never returned to the Capitan Range. She never, as far as anyone recorded, spoke of Thomas Aldrin to another person. Whether this was guilt or grief or simply the choice of a woman who had finished with a chapter and did not feel the need to return to it, that is not something the mountains kept. Only this remains, the note, the 3 words. The gap between what was meant and what was heard, which is, in the end, not the story of one marriage in one territory in 1 year, but the oldest story, told again and again, in every language, in every place, by every person who has ever tried to put the full weight of a life into the only words they had room to leave. I had to. She did. He didn't know. Someone explained it once, 22 years too late, in the same kitchen, in the same October light, with the same mountains in the distance. And even then, even with the explanation, the gap did not fully close. It only became visible, which is, sometimes, the most that can be asked of understanding. The stagecoach runs on Thursdays. The mountains do not move. 3 words on brown paper, charcoal fading, a table cleared before supper for the only time in 21 months of marriage. Some departures are not betrayals. Some notes are not explanations. Some silences between what is meant and what is heard are not failures of language. They are simply the distance between two people who were never quite speaking the same tongue.